Planting a tree or shrub in the garden is a statement of intent and permanence. The joy that is brought by watching a plant grow and mature over the years is one of the most satisfactory aspects of all gardening. We are extremely fortunate that the climate afforded us in the temperate zone makes it possible for us to cultivate an extraordinarily wide variety of trees and shrubs. Over the course of this DVD, I'm going to look at some of the choices that are available to us for planting and explore how trees and shrubs can bring an extra dimension to our gardens.
For many of us, choosing a tree to plant in our garden presents a number of different queries. What site do we have? What soil? And what sort of tree do we want? So we've come to the National Arboretum here at Westonbirt, home to 3,500 trees spread over 600 acres, to see some of the trees growing here. And what better place to start than the Acer Glade, especially if you're looking for autumn colour.
The Acer Group holds some of the most decorative trees, both big and small, for any gardens. It includes huge sycamores and delicate Japanese acers suitable for cultivation in containers. At Westonbirt, we find them showing their true colours in the twilight of the year.
This is the Japanese maple, Acer palmatum. It's one of the finest trees of all, a native of China and Japan. And this is what it gets to in its native surroundings. It gets to be a big, big tree. Now, we're used to seeing smaller varieties in our garden, but it's from this tree that all those varieties arise. And it is no surprise, because it is a wonderful tree in its shape, its colour, the typical 5-starred leaf that it has, beautiful autumn colour, wonderful twisting trunk, layered branches. It's one of the most beautiful trees of all, and if you're lucky enough to go to Japan or China and see it in its natural habitat, this is what it looks like. A great big, towering, splendid, romantic looking tree. The lovely thing about Acer palmatum is you never quite know what you're going to get. This one, for example, the leaves on beautiful pink stems are going from green through yellow, bronze and finally red. But if there's one you had to choose, it would definitely be this one. It's Acer palmatum osakazuki. The colour is quite outstanding. It's a small tree, it doesn't get particularly big, but it's really lovely because it has those little helicopters, the little seeds that they all have. Again, with little pink tinges to them. It's quite outstanding, and today if you had to choose one tree, it would definitely be this one. Autumn colour beyond compare. One of our best loved trees, of course, is the conker tree, the common horse chestnut, Aesculus hippocastanum. It does get to a huge size. It starts straight, but as it gets older, it starts to bend down. Wonderful for climbing. Beloved of little boys, of course, for its conkers and what you can do with them. But you need lots of room. It gets to a great size and produces a lot of leaf on the floor in autumn. But before it does that, it has this wonderful autumn colour. But it's tall, statuesque, large. You need a big garden, plenty of room, and get ready to make lots of leaf mould. Now, for many of us with small gardens who intend to plant trees, it is important that those trees have winter interest. And the birches are very good for that because of their bark. Now, this one with its handily placed label is an American hybrid birch called Betula purpusei. And behind me is another one with a slightly lighter shade of bark. And they come in all right from silver right to this dark purple, all shades through those colours. And they really do shine out on a dank day such as this. A good silvery bark on a birch tree is ideal. And they are very hardy trees. We associate them with the north of England, Scotland. They grow well by the sides of streams and rivers. They don't mind their roots getting wet. So they're pretty tough and they also can stand the dry and extremes of cold. So a very good all-round tree, nice, easy shape, quite tall, although they don't get too tall, but quite narrow, quite straight growing. But for all-round winter interest, a birch is a good bet.
Amongst the huge collection of trees at Weston Burt are both natives and exotics. But as is often the case with trees and shrubs, it is the most common that is the most beautiful, as I discovered in the depths of the Arboretum.
Now, you don't get many trees with orange and pink seed pods, but that's what you get with the common spindle, Euonymus europaeus. Now, it's really a hedgerow tree, but in this case it's growing freestanding, and it is absolutely covered in pods, and they are really unusual, absolutely gorgeous. The outer casing is pink, and the inner seed is actually orange, most unusual. Grown in hedges, it's got the typical Euonymus striped bark, and we normally think of Euonymus as small shrubs in the garden. But this one, it's a native hedge tree, but grown on its own, it makes a wonderful small tree for a small garden. But there are many different trees that produce really good autumn colour, including a lot of our own native species such as oak and in particular beech. But this is not a native, but it is one of my favourites. It's called Parotia persica, the Persian ironwood. And what's lovely about this, as well as producing wonderful autumn colour when the frost comes, and there's been some frost recently, and what that does is it breaks down the cellulose, causing the green leaf to turn red, is that this tree has a beautiful shape. It's sort of pendulous at the top, it stops growing at about 20 foot, and then it starts to arch over. So it has this wonderful layered effect. And we can see quite clearly from this one that the outer leaves have been touched by the frost, it's turned them, but that the inner layers are still green. So by degrees the leaves will fall, and by degrees the tree will turn in colour. It's a stunning shape of tree, and it does have wonderful, wonderful red tints in the autumn. Now in Finland, Sorbus ocuparia, which is the common rowan or mountain ash, was always known as the famine tree because the berries very high in vitamin C and they stored well through the winter. These trees are very, very hardy. They can take all the amount of frost and freezing conditions that you throw at them. So they're a really good tree for northern parts of this country, northern Europe in general. But lovely autumn colour, and you can make wonderful things out of the berries, jams and jellies and good strong winter drinks. Lovely tree, doesn't get that big, and wonderful bird feeding as well. You get beautiful birds like the waxwing feeding on them in the northern parts of the country. And for a small garden, for a cold garden, a Sorbus is a good choice. One group of trees that's becoming increasingly popular in the garden are the dogwoods, the Cornus family. And there are a number of wonderful different species, and they do great things. Colour-wise, fabulous autumn colour, always, from all kinds of different species. But also they have this habit of fanning upwards, which is unusual in a tree. This is Cornus cusa, the Japanese dogwood, and I love this tree. It gets darker and darker as the autumn progresses, and it has a wonderful shape. And generally, as dogwoods go, they are a really good choice for the garden. Delicate in shape, delicate in foliage, good colour. And the National Collection is held at Newby in North Yorkshire, where I caught up with Mark Jackson, the head gardener.
Tucked away at the north end of the Vale of York, near Ripon, Newby is one of the finest gardens in the United Kingdom. As well as sumptuous herbaceous borders containing rare and beautiful plants, it also has a fine collection of trees and shrubs, among them the National Collection of Cornus. Now Mark, we're here with this venerable old specimen of Cornus cusa chinensis, which was planted in 1937 and is part of the National Collection of Dogwoods that you hold here at Newby. How did that collection come about?
Came about, Tom, Mr. Compton has a particular passion for trees and shrubs, and Cornus was a genus that interested him greatly, and after moving a plant from somewhere else in the garden and having success, he started a collection which developed, and as chairman of the NCCPG in 1988, he applied for status as a collection holder for the genus Cornus, and the collection has just continued to grow from there.
And how many are in it now?
We have about 120 species, cultivars and hybrids at the moment, and it's ever growing.
Most of them are noticeable by their seed pods, and they tend to, almost all of them, turn red in the autumn when they're coming ripe. And that can often lead to trouble with birds, can't it?
It can, and they look moderately appealing, the fruit, like smallish strawberries, and to a degree I suppose you could argue they taste a little bit like a strawberry. But yes, it gives wonderful extra impact and dimension to what is already a good plant.
I think they're underrated and undervalued, and it's really nice to see such a big collection.
Trees in particular are used throughout the garden at Newby to maximise their particular strong points. The white-trunked birch and the snakebark maple are two species that have been planted in groups to bring their most dramatic effects to the fore.
We're in this beautiful grove of birches, Mark, and this is Betula utilis and the varieties Jack Montii with its wonderful white stems. And Mr. Compton Senior planted these, and they must be, how old do you think they are?
Probably about 35
years old.
Yeah, quite quick growing and very useful plants because obviously the canopy is quite light, so even in smaller gardens they can be used because you're getting an impact quite quickly with the speed of growth, and you can plant underneath. You haven't got as dense shade as with some trees, so they can be extremely useful. Sometimes there's the options of using it as a multi-stemmed tree as well, if space is tight.
And perhaps we should mention that the bark is really such an extraordinary
stunning,
part of this
isn't it?
tree,
Absolutely, yes, it is. And if you peel the bark off, it's quite pale, and then over a period of time of aging, it goes more white.
It darkens down into white, isn't it?
But it's a very it's a very intimate tree to come and touch and feel, really, isn't it? You know, you can't just walk past it without going and having a look.
You're drawn to it, aren't you?
You are, not
and
just with the eye.
And works really well in a kind of glade or a grove like this, doesn't it?
It does, because from a distance with the light, it shows up well, and you can see the shadows of the leaves moving around on the trunk. So it's got a lot of quality.
And in the same vein, you've got some Acer Grisium, which also have incredible bark. Well, should we go and have a look at those?
Indeed, yes.
Now this is Acer Grisium, Mark, and the bark on it is, again, extraordinary, like flaking chocolate.
Wonderful plants, aren't they? And I think they all have individuality and character. If you actually look around at these three, they're all slightly different in the way the bark is flaking and peeling off, and the colorations have a difference. So each one is an individual. And I think that's something that marks them out. And
what's also nice is that you can actually see through to the kind of green proper bark, the kind of cambium layer, if you like.
You can, and I think as you're doing now, very much like with the birches, they're plants that draw you in, not just to look at, but to feel and touch. You can't resist coming up and just having a little tweak at some of the
exactly,
bark.
And that works so well when they're in a little clump of three, back to the kind of glade effect.
That's right.
You come upon it and you're immediately struck by the impact that they have. They really are beautiful. What I also like about them is the kind of Japanese layered long branches that they have.
That's right. They're
snaking out.
They look well from a distance with that effect and the canopy.
And can you put an age on them?
About 70, 80 years old, so takes a while to get there, but well worth it in the end.
It's worth the wait, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some of the most valuable trees and shrubs to gardeners are those that flower in spring, before they put on their foliage. Two of these are magnolias and Japanese cherries, plants that are well suited to a temperate climate.
The lovely thing about the magnolia groups is that they contain some of the finest hardy flowering trees and shrubs. And this is one of the best for a small garden. It's called Magnolia liliflora nigra, and it produces these wonderful purple flowers on bare wood, and that's the key about magnolias. Most of them produce flowers on bare wood, so you can really see those flowers. I like this species and this variety because it produces a compact, almost columnar, it's not quite rounded, a good shape of a plant for a small garden. Lots of lovely flowers, and you can see multi-stems. It's got to about its optimum size. It's not going to get much bigger. No scent, but wonderful shape and magnificent colour in the early spring.
Whilst the magnolias tend towards serenity and elegance, the Japanese cherries are blousy and bright.
The lovely thing about Japanese cherries is that they're very free flowerers. They put on their flowers before their leaves, which is another real advantage. Like all members of the prunus family, they produce a huge amount of flower buds every spring. So there's masses and masses of flower before the leaves come out, a bit like magnolias, which makes them stand out as early spring trees. And they're very simple to grow. They don't have any particular soil condition requirements, but they won't grow on really, really alkaline soil. So a little bit of acid or around the neutral mark on the pH scale is absolutely fine for them. They don't need any specific fertilizers, and what's more, they don't need any specific pruning. So you can just let them grow happily, give them a bit of room, about 12 to 15 feet apart between trees, and they'll just flower every spring, year after year, and look magnificent every year.
Whilst our own choice of a tree or a shrub for the garden is a personal one, it is essential that they sit well within a garden from a design point of view. At Goulter's Mill near Chippenham in Wiltshire, the effect of thoughtful planting is plain to see.
Now, a garden such as this is not entirely dependent upon herbaceous plants. Dotted throughout the borders are some excellent shrubs and some ornamental trees, such as these pom-pom hollies grown as standards with a lovely round ball on top, these sculpted box. And what these do is they add height, different scale, different sculptural size and shapes, and it all adds together to make the complete effect.
In contrast to the smaller sculpted trees, tall straight-growing junipers lend a dramatic spire-shaped presence to the space.
When it comes to trees in the garden, we don't always have to think of wide-spreading things taking up a lot of room, casting a lot of shade. These two junipers do quite the opposite. And secondly, they're evergreen. And we don't see nearly enough evergreen plants in the garden for my money. Wonderful structure, wonderful form, very architectural, and they create this wonderful portal. Evergreen all the year round, wonderful scent off the crushed leaves, and they really do create an extra dimension to the garden.
And finally, to complete the picture, there are trees that grow along the ground.
Now in sunshine, chance to look at this wonderful prostrate conifer, Juniper squamata, Nepal juniper. And what I really love about it is the ground it covers. It's evergreen. It is a tree, but it spreads out rather than growing upwards. Go very well with the gravel, very well with ferns behind. I think it looks fantastic.
At the Annick Garden in Northumberland, there exists an excellent example of training trees to suit specific areas. I caught up with Derek Guthrie, who talked me through the process. Pleaching is an ancient form of growing and training trees, practiced notably amongst ornamental trees such as lime and hornbeam. In the case of the Annick Garden, the pleaching extends to crab apples, which have created tall boxed frames of rich foliage and colourful fruit in the ornamental garden. The pruning and tying in must be thorough, but the lasting effect of the shape of the trees and the abundance of fruit is testament to the skill involved, so typical of the attention to detail that is the hallmark of the Annick Garden. Derek, let's talk a little bit more about the pleaching of these amazing crab apples, because it's coming up for pruning time, isn't it?
It is, yes. They're a major talking point with a lot of visitors that come to the garden. They're a dying art as well. They're really, really important, and they give us a lot of height in the garden as well.
Sure, and it's pruning time coming up,
it
summer
is,
pruning, so
yes.
we might look at some of these shoots and see what you're going to do.
Well, that's right. What we do is we cut them back to 2 buds from last year's growth. You'll see where they've been done last year. There's 2 buds there. All the flowers for next year are in the base here, and we're ready. Come spring next year, they'll come away. But also we're pruning them back to help ripen all the fruits on it, and let people see them. The autumn and winter is very important for these fruits, because they're the main feature, basically, of the crabapple through the winter. They stay there all winter, and the birds just take them as and when. Beautiful red for the winter time.
And the leaders are getting, all the shoots that need tying in are getting tied in with this flexi-tie stuff.
With flexi-tie, the beauty of the flexi-tie is that it's quite soft and it doesn't bind onto the branches. What you find is we have to replace a lot of these each year, cut them off and re-tie them, because they can start to bind in. So we replace them each year with some new flexi-tie. And it works very well for us.
It's very labour-intensive, this job.
It is incredibly intense.
But it's really worthwhile doing. Yeah. Any specific feeding regime?
We use just a general-purpose fertiliser over the base, as we do with most things. But we also, when we spray for apple scab and those sort of things, we use a liquid seaweed fertiliser in the spray. So they're getting a foliar feed every time.
At the same time.
They get sprayed. Which can be sort of early to late spring into the early summer. They're getting done once a fortnight, really.
Well, they look fantastic. They're a credit to you. And how long have these plants been here?
They've actually been here for 4 years, because the garden's been open for 4 years, but they are actually about 12 years old.
Aside from the native species that we can grow in our gardens, most of which are fully hardy, there is a huge array of exotic trees and shrubs, which are also suitable. At Goulter's Mill, I found 2 that would complement any garden.
Now, there are ferns, and then there are superior ferns, and this one is surely one of the very best. It's the tree fern, Dicksonia antarctica, and it comes from southeast Australia, New Zealand and Tasmania, and it was introduced into this country in the 19th century. And what's extraordinary about it is that most of its root is actually above ground. What you see between the start of the fronds and the base of the plant is its root. There's only a small round root ball underground, which is for stability. And then, in the spring, these extraordinary fronds start to unfurl, and this is what's so beautiful about it. Huge great fronds, delicately unfurling at the tip, and creating this wonderful acid green colour. Now, it's pretty hardy, but in severe winters, what happens is that some of these fronds will die back, and the new ones for the following year, which will come from the centre of the plant, they need to be kept in the warm and dry. So you need to get an old onion sack, fill it with leaves or straw, and bed that down in the top of the plant. That will stop the frost getting in. It's not afraid of shade, it's pretty tolerant of any kind of soil, and once it's growing like this, it creates the most dramatic effect. If you were looking for an exotic tree to plant in your garden, you might do worse than to choose a palm. And this one would be a very good choice. It's the Chusan palm, Trachycarpus fortunei. And it's been in cultivation in this country since the 19th century, when it was found in China by Robert Fortune, who brought it back. So it stood the test of time really well. And the key thing about it, not only is it really beautiful with its lovely furry stem and this wonderful mop top of fronds, and then lovely seed, yellow flowers, and then black seeds to follow. Very ornamental, but it's also hardy. We're in the middle of rural Wiltshire here, in a frost pocket. Temperatures really plummet in the winter, and this guy can handle it. You can throw all the frost at it you want, and it can stand it. It's very tough, very beautiful, and it makes a great tree for a small or a large garden.
One of the finest places to see exotic trees and shrubs in the British Isles is undoubtedly the Abbey Gardens on Tresco in the Isles of Scilly. I spent some time with Mike Nellams, the curator, talking through his extensive collection.
Mike, as befits the curator of the Abbey Gardens, you're leaning casually on an enormous Facrea, which is a plant from Mexico, which looks like it's in the yucca family. Is that right?
It is.
On the nail there?
Yeah, pretty well. The great thing, it's almost like it's out of a science fiction film, isn't it?
It's like
it's
a triffid. It's
incredible.
astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is you have this wonderful foliage that just sort of grows for any time from up to 5 years to 15 or 20 years, and then suddenly this huge flower spike rockets out of it. And again, it goes anything up to sort of 20 foot, and then it cascades into this yellow flowering pyramid, like a yellow Christmas tree, if you like. What's more interesting is when it starts to finish flowering, each of those flowers will turn into a small bulb, which form a whole and complete plant, will drop onto the floor and form a forest of young plant. We have to come and shovel all these up. So what we do, we actually let them go old and dry. We cut the spike off, that falls over. But then we're left with this large, wilting, sort of brown sort of trunk full of leaves. They're very difficult to cut up, so we actually set fire to it. So it's like a huge flaming torch. Once we've got rid of that, we just saw it off and go away.
Amazing.
Of all the trees that sculpt the outline of the garden, there is one particular specimen that shines like a beacon through the summer months, the New Zealand flame tree.
Mike, we really have hit the garden at the right time of year, haven't we? Because some of your signature plants are in full flower. And we've just seen that huge Facreo with that vast, great flower spike he puts up. And now the Metrosideros, the New Zealand flame trees. And they have Maori names, I believe, don't they?
Yeah, every plant that is a native of New Zealand has its own Maori name. This one is called the rata, Metrosideros robusta. And the great thing is, it's the best tree for us on Scilly for tolerance of wind and salt spray. A lovely leathery leaf. You could hit it with a hurricane, the trees won't blow over and the leaves won't go brown. But as an added bonus, they've also got these wonderful red flowers that come out in May, June and July, depending which species you've got. They'll grow to a magnificent size. Also, they'll have aerial roots hanging down, so they're a tree for all parts of the year.
And you can see them from miles away, can't you, when they're in full flower?
Oh, yeah, they're fabulous. You can stand on another island and see our trees in flower into the garden, yeah.
Around every corner of the Abbey Gardens, more treasures await, with every nook and cranny filled with year-round colour and interest, a true testament to the skill of Mike and his staff.
Mike, we're on the east side of the house now, in full sun, in this wonderful area of rockery which leads up to the house, and staring at this great big silver tree behind it, which looks like it's just about to come into flower.
It's called the silver tree because of this reason, because of the colour of the leaves, but it's covered in fine, tiny little hairs that resist the wind and the salt spray, so it sits there billowing in the wind beautifully.
The importance of shelter to the Abbey Gardens cannot be overstressed, but some of the hedging that provides it has become an art form.
One of the most extraordinary structural features of this garden at Tresco are these extraordinary hedges. They're ilex oak, evergreen oak, Quercus ilex. They come from the Mediterranean, and believe it or not, they're 45 to 50 foot high. They've been planted since the beginning of the 19th century, and they're pruned every year by ladders. The boys get up on ladders. They're evergreen. They shed some leaves all the year round, so lots of little brown leaves around. But my goodness, they provide the shelter. They're tightly packed, so they stop the salt-laden winds blasting everything on the higher terraces above this. So this is a structure that's been here for a long time, has enabled everything in and around it to grow up undisturbed over the years. What a structure, what a feature they make. Rustling in the wind, a really fantastic kind of statement of what is possible to grow here on Tresco.
As we have seen, there exists an enormous range of trees and shrubs. The choice is down to the individual, and thankfully we are well served by nurseries and garden centres in the UK to furnish our requirements. I headed down to my nearest outlet to see what was on offer.
Now obviously autumn and winter are the times to be planting trees and shrubs, but late autumn is a really good time to come and buy them because you can still see a lot of them with their leaves on at the garden centre. And what I've done is I've picked out a selection which I'd like to grow in my garden, and it's quite wide-ranging. Some grow in pots, some can grow against walls, some are freestanding. So it's a bit of a selection, a lot of them my favourites. Now, start with this wonderful magnolia, which is a great favourite of mine, Magnolia salata. Obviously I'm from Cornwall, so I love those type of plants that grow in acid soil, and that's the key with this one. If you don't have acid soil, you're going to have to grow it in a container using ericaceous compost, but that's fine. It's a plant that will respond to those type of conditions, and you can see it's covered in buds. It's going to flower heavily next year, and it will continue to do that in the early spring, year after, as long as you remember to refresh the compost, keep feeding it. One of my favourite flowering shrubs is this black elder, Sambucus nigra. Wonderful pink, flat-topped elder leaves in the summer. No garden is complete without an Acer palmatum, its wonderful red foliage. And a very good hedging shrub is Elaeagnus. It fixes nitrogen, it's got thorns, and it's got good autumn scent. This happens to be variegated, but not all of them are. You can get just plain green. But autumn scent is very unusual in a garden shrub. Early spring flower is this beautiful Hamamelis, the witch hazel. There's wonderful little papery yellow flowers with the red centres in early spring. Likewise, the Viburnum burkwoodii, excellent scent in early spring, but a wonderful shrub, arching stems. And as we're thinking more and more about gardening with dry conditions, we must include the cistus, the rock rose, which comes from the Mediterranean. It does really well in dry conditions without moisture. As does the bay, which is also another, like the Elaeagnus, another very good hedging plant, but excellent scent, very good culinary herb from the leaves, and lovely colour with the red stems and the bright green foliage. And lastly, a lovely, lovely summer flowering shrub, the Ceanothus, the California lilac. Again, not too worried about water, a mass of blue flowers all summer long, and a selection of these would make a very, very pretty garden.
The best time for planting trees and shrubs are autumn and winter, as the plants approach dormancy. It is a discipline that requires care and attention to detail, for you only get one chance. Once a tree is planted, it may grow for several lifetimes.
I want to concentrate on tree planting today in this paddock. Now we've already got an existing chestnut and an oak behind me, and they're wonderful trees. What I've got here is an apple. Now as it happens, the principle for planting trees is largely the same. But with apples, because I want to start a little orchard, I need a couple of friends for this chap to help it cross-pollinate. So the first thing to do is to go and find another couple of apple trees.
There are many ways to buy trees through catalogues or online, but by far the best way is to go to the nursery or garden centre and pick the tree yourself.
Now I've chosen a couple more varieties to go with our discovery to try and extend the season a bit. Now these two, we've got a Fiesta here, which has got Cox parentage, and that means it's going to have that lovely juicy Cox consistency and a really strong flavour. It's a bit more red in its colour, but it's a really, really good plant. And because it's been well bred, it doesn't have the disease problems that are normally associated with Cox. Cox is a tree that has well-known problems with fungal diseases, so you can't plant a Cox anywhere. But a Fiesta overrides those problems because it's got stout breeding, and it's going to give you long life and lots of fruit. Now the other one is a Worcester Pomaine. It's an older variety, a bit like Cox. It's been around for a long time. It's a wonderful, wonderful apple. It's not quite as late as Cox, it's more a mid-season variety, but it's very juicy, very, very delicious, and a good tree not associated with too many problems. Not too much in the way of fungus, not too much in the way of canker, so it's a good all-round garden tree. Now the three of them together are going to make a nice group. They're all going to help each other with pollination. But the good thing about a garden centre like this, or a nursery, is there's going to be a wide choice. You can get all different types of varieties. I've chosen three that's going to suit me in terms of flavour and extending the season. That's what's important. They're all on the same rootstocks. They're going to grow roughly to the same height. They're going to complement each other as regards pollination, shape of tree, length of fruiting season. And now what we've got to do is go home and plant them. Now I've got my three apple trees. Now I spaced them about 5 metres apart, which is roughly 15 foot, which is about the minimum really, because fruit trees anywhere between 15 and 20 is about right. 20 would be ideal, but I want them to keep a little bit closer. They're not on really vigorous rootstocks. They're on medium-sized rootstocks, sort of bush size, so they're only going to get about 12 to 15 foot tall. Now what we've got to do is dig nice big holes, get some nutrition in the bottom of those holes, plant them, firm them in and water them.
When you have chosen the site for the tree or the shrub, place it on the ground, whether in a pot or bare-rooted, and mark out a circle at least twice the size of the plant. Then scrape any turf off and only then dig out the hole.
The next thing now is to see if the tree fits, see if I've dug deep enough. So I'm going to stand the tree still in its pot in the hole, and that from here looks like it's absolutely perfect. It's below the top of the pot, which has got an inch or so to spare before we hit the soil in the pot. Seems to be well below the rim of the hole, so that's fine. Now what we need to do is add some compost so that the tree's got something to help itself get started. I think 3 big spadefuls is going to be enough. I'm going to work it up around the sides of the hole a bit. And now I'm ready to plant. Now ordinarily, an apple tree like this, if it were in a windy site, would need staking. But we're very well sheltered here and it's not too windy, so for my money there's no need to stake. And anyway, I like to see apples growing off at a lean and getting old and looking gnarled and old. And so I'm going to take this stake away because this stake was merely in to support the plant in its pot, and it would have no bearing on supporting the plant in the ground against wind. This is something that the garden centre have put in, and I'm just going to ease it gently out. Now the next thing to do is to take the tree out of its pot and tease its roots away, because it's been in this pot for a year, and I know that because the roots are quite dark and quite leathery. So we just give the pot a tap, and that way it just releases from the side of the roots. Now the next thing we have to do is to tease the roots away from the root ball a little bit, not too much. We want to keep the soil intact, but we want to get some of the roots loose. Now this tree, we know, has been in a pot for quite some time, probably over a year. So it's really important that it gets a chance to root into the soil and not just sit in a tight ball and grow in on itself. So we do that quite simply by just gently easing bits and pieces of the root throughout the root ball away from the soil. Now once it's in the hole and you're satisfied that it's not too deep and not going to be proud over the top so that the roots are exposed, and also that you're not going to bury the graft union, and this really is important, particularly with apples. A lot of trees are grafted, but apples are always grafted because they don't come true from seed. And what happens is that this is the rootstock that controls the vigour of the tree, and this particular variety has been grafted onto this rootstock. And if you were to bury that root graft union underneath the soil, you would encourage the rootstock itself to grow, and you would find shoots coming up from that rootstock. You don't want that. You want this part of the tree to grow, not the rootstock. Once you're satisfied it's in the hole properly, you can start backfilling. That's it. The rootstock isn't buried, which is good. We're going to give it a good water now, and then we're going to mulch on top of that.
One thing to remember about gardening is that it's fun for all the family.
So that's the 3 trees in. Now they've been watered, they've been mulched, but the key point is to remember to weed around them. They have a distinct ring around them of mulch. We've got to keep the weeds away from them through the growing season, spring and summer next year, and after that give them another mulch, probably next autumn, maybe a top up in the spring, depending on what's happened over the winter. But there are some fruit buds on, so there'll definitely be some fruit next year, and after that they should fruit for a long time and grow old gracefully.
As we have seen, there exists a huge array of trees and shrubs suitable for planting in our gardens, and I hope over the course of this DVD I've managed to give some insights as to what types may suit the individual. From experience, I have come to learn that they give more pleasure than almost any other group of plants in the garden.